What is alternative music? That's a great question. Nobody seems to know anymore.
I think it used to be a music that was unpopular, and then they discovered they could make lots of money.
I'm Stalin Gossard. I play guitar. I'm Eddie Vitter, and I sing.
Soundgarden!
We came out of like an urban scene that bands like Pearl Jam, Mudhoney, and the Melvins, and Nirvana all came out of.
I didn't want to be a rock star at all. It was freaking me out.
These are desperate times.
Hey, it is Brando for the Desperate Times 90s Music Podcast, episode number 2. Hope you enjoyed the first one with Sully from Godsmack. This time around, not going to have the camera focused on me. I do not want that. We're going to have the camera focused on our guest today, and that is going to be Mr. Dave Lory, the manager of the late and great Jeff Buckley. So let me just set down my phone here because I want to focus on our conversation, because as I'm already putting my finger over the camera, that's rock and roll. Jam it. So I'm going to do it like that. I'm just going to hold it. That's going to be the best way for me to do it. So yes, if you're just tuning in, I'm seeing people click on Facebook Live in our Desperate Times 90s Music Podcast. This is through, and this is brought to you by alternativeNation.net. And this is, I don't know if I want to say congratulations on the book, but I do want to say congratulations because it's been a long time coming. It's still a sensitive subject for everybody, you know, to all fans. It's like as soon as you say the name Jeff Buckley, you see to just friends of mine, it's like this light comes up, like, oh, Jeff Buckley, and then just brought down sad of just of the story. So. Before we get into Jeff, and of course your new book, and that's why you're, doing a radio tour this morning. You're kind of out and about. You're doing the PR instead of being behind the scenes. I kind of want to get to know.
Strange.
Yeah. So you're in front of the camera, literally, right now. So I want to talk to you about who you are, Dave. I know you went to NYU close because we're in New York City right now. Right. Are you from the East Coast? Where'd you grow up?
No, I was actually born in Leavenworth, Kansas, and lived in Lincoln, Omaha, Nebraska, Charlotte, Virginia Beach, and so I kind of moved around quite a bit.
Oh, so you're a mutt.
I am a mutt.
Do you call any place home, or just with you growing up everywhere and also managing other artists like with Jeff Buckley, the Allman Brothers, Courtney Love? Is the Globe your home? You just don't have a place?
New York City, probably, because I lived here in my single days up to when I was about 37, even though I moved out about 20 miles out in New Jersey when my first child was born, and she's 22 now. So, but I still consider New York my home. Okay, well, welcome home. I should say that. So how did you get into managing? Before we get into Jeff and into your book, I read that you were a drummer first, right? Did I read that correctly? I was, and that's when I started managing. I was managing the bands I was in, and it eventually got to a point I knew I had to go to LA or New York to make it in music, period. So I left the band. The band at the time out of Virginia Beach said, we were getting big along the East Coast, and they said, you got to make a decision, either be our manager or play drums. And I liked being a manager better, so I got Scott Travis, who now plays with Judas Priest, to replace me. We were both local, and I came up and started New York University, and I entered the music business program and minored in music.
Why managing over drumming? Did you not want to be a rock star, or you kind of wanted to go behind the scenes and not have to deal with the perceived stress? Because you certainly had plenty of stress.
No, I've always liked coordinating things, producing shows, events, putting all the things together that make it work. And I just started getting drawn to people like famous managers and what they did and how they made the artist's career. And I felt by being an artist myself would give me a better outlook on how to treat an artist and how to take care of an artist.
Anyone in particular you looked up to?
Well, Peter Grant of Led Zeppelin. I found him colorful.
That's a way to put it.
And then I had met Bill Aucoin before when he was managing Kiss, and the list goes on. Doc McGee, who's still managing Kiss today, but Bill Aucoin had Billy Idol and had Kiss at the time. So it was really, you didn't get to see the manager that much, and I was kind of that way too. You won't find a lot of photos with me with my artists that I worked with because it was always about the artist. It wasn't about the manager, and I used to loathe managers that were trying to get in the spotlight.
You know, I want to get to like what your first break was, because in the excerpts that I read from your new book, Jeff Buckley, From Hallelujah to The Last Goodbye, I liked your first encounter with Jeff. You just didn't give a shit. You know,
that was really true.
Because I mean, obviously,
I never heard him sing or play at that time.
But even at that point, you knew all the hype around him, and you're like, "This is the way we're going to do it." So you had to have some confidence behind your persona and, you know, your talent, your skill set. So before we get to Jeff, what was your first break to say, you know, I can do this for a living, I can manage, you know, maybe the first big act that you did? Because it had to be before, because you got the Allman Brothers back together, right?
Yeah, that was the first band I ever saw in concert too when I was 16.
The Allman Brothers?
Yeah, so that was
that's a trip.
Pretty wild. And I write about that in the book, backstage, where Dickie Betts said, "How you doing, hippie?" and punched me in the arm, and I said, "Do you got anything against hippies?" He said, "No, I don't mind beating up a few now and then." But it was all gradual. I had a country singer, Pete Seeger's nephew. I had a couple singles on the independent chart right out of high school or out of college, and then I started tour managing all the crazy metal bands. I earned a reputation as a cleaner. It's a mafia saying that it's messed up, give it to Dave, he'll fix it. And also,
like the Wolf in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So at first I didn't like that because I was getting all these crazy situations around the world. But in '89, Johnny Pedal, William Morris called me up, and he said, Dickie Betts is going out for a 2-week solo tour. The Allman Brothers are going to get back together after 10 years. And I went out on the road with Dickie for 2 weeks, and Dickie just loved my style, and I didn't, you know, I stood up to Dickie, you know, about doing things, and he liked that. Because the Allman Brothers, you have to understand, for decades they had money stolen from them. They spent in excess. You know, they weren't managed properly. So this was a unique experience. And then Dickie called Greg and Butch and J-Mo and said, I found our tour manager. So the first year I was a tour manager.
Okay.
And after the Dreams tour, they went in to do the album Seven Turns, and Greg's management contract had ended at the end of that tour. I was a tour manager. So I brought out Bert Holman, who's still the manager. I don't know if they're going out anymore, but, you know, still the manager and handles the Allman Brothers. Brought him out as a tour manager, and then I started managing Greg solo with Danny Goldberg. Danny Goldberg handled Nirvana,
right?
Bonnie Raitt, legendary, president of several labels. He actually, so we co-managed the Allman Brothers together. He handled Butch, J-Mo, and Dickie, and I handled Greg. And that kept the balance, because any band that's been together 25 years has issues. It's like a big family, right? You love each other, you'll stick up for each other, but you fight all the time.
Sure, and you're not even just having, and this relates to Jeff, it's not just managing the talent. If you have, if you reach a certain level, if there's a certain, like, you know, entourage, or, you know, the amount of band members, there are other managers you have to deal with. Right. So that's even more personality. So again, we're talking to Dave Lory, Jeff Buckley, for his brand new book, From Hallelujah to The Last Goodbye. What prompted you? What made now the right time to put this out? Because the chapters that I read the other day, you feel the pain that you feel now. Like, I feel your pain through that, and I thought it was pretty brilliant to not just when you talked about the day that you found out about Jeff, but you had his other friends and family, right? So you really got a full perspective of the loss all these years later. So why now?
For whatever reason, you know, I went through a lawsuit for 6 years because he told me don't let Sony have the music, and I knew they owned it, and, you know, the estate, I was in a lawsuit with them. And so I knew if I wrote anything or talked to anybody, it was coming from a place of anger and resentment and, you know, attorneys and lawsuits. And so myself and there's like 8 other people that were close to him that are in the book, including my wife, who was his promotion manager in Europe at the time. And
you met her through Jeff, right?
I met her through Jeff. I've got 2 lovely daughters in college, so I think about them every day. But I got a call from CAA, and they said, I think it's time that you talk. I think it's time to write the book, and I want to read that book. And I went to everybody else because during the course of the couple decades, I'd get a call from like BBC in England, and I'd say no, or somebody would call me saying so-and-so's doing something. Are you involved? I'd say no, and they say, well, I'm going to say no too. And so this time when I called up, it was very delicate. You know, when I called these people to be involved in the book, it's like saying, hey, let's go relive 21 years ago about what happened and tell everybody. It's not easy. And the first chapter my agent at CAA wanted was the death chapter. And I went out there and the boxes were still sealed from the lawsuit. And I went on my back porch and I wrote the death chapter for 3 days and just bawled like a baby. And my wife kept coming out and making sure, she goes, you're okay, you okay? And what it was, I realized I didn't grieve him. I didn't, when something like that happens, your job is to manage the chaos, take care of my wife, who was his promotion manager, take care of all the Columbia Records staff that's calling you up in tears. All my artists knew each other and liked each other. So, and just people you meet along the way, So I realized I put the lid on the box and put my emotions in it and just was numb.
Is this something that you anticipated doing? Because it's good for you to have had the self-awareness to say, if you spoke to somebody, if you wrote a book before, it would be coming from a bad place. Because I've experienced personally, as many of our listeners and most people have, a sudden loss.
Right.
All loss is terrible, but if it's just a sudden loss from, a suicide or any sort of accident, it's like, what do you do? And there is a grieving process, and it's different to everybody. So did you just kind of, in one of the chapters that I read, it was interesting, and you said you were like kind of like a general, kind of like do this, do that. And that's kind of how I am. That's how I compartmentalize getting through and grieve.
It's like a military operation. I mean, at first you don't know what you're going to do. Thank God there was no internet back then, so I could get the message out, what I wanted. But Danny Goldberg, who I co-managed the Allman Brothers with, and Janet Billing handled Nirvana, and when Kurt killed himself. And they called me right away. And, that meant a lot because there's not a book written when you're, rock star, publicity, positive publicity artist dies. And they also said, you're part of a club you don't want to belong to. And they said I'd get that call one day, and I did when Michael Hutchence hung himself.
When I read that, my heart sank. And even before it said there was a certain club, in my head I'm like, there is a certain club. And then the words came to the page. So I felt like I was right there with you. Beautifully written. Why do you think they wanted you to start with the death chapter? Because did that offend you at all?
No, because when you go for a book deal, you have to do 2 chapters. So I figured, that's going to be the chapter that's going to get the hook.
Okay.
And then I did the intro chapter, which was kind of like a forward, but because Jeff always did things different, Jim Irvin, my co-writer, said, we're not doing it like every other book. Jeff didn't do music like every other artist. So he and Jim was actually with me in Dublin when I got the call. I was with an artist, Cattell Kennick, on Electra at the time. She was from Ireland. And so there's a trust factor there. My agent at CA knew Jeff before he came to New York because he was besotted with a girl that his roommate. So all these things started lining up. It started by somebody approaching me to do a movie, and which I didn't want to work with eventually. But I said at that point, if I'm going to do a movie, I much rather write the book because that's the best way to put things down to begin the screenplay. But what I thought about most, and talking it over with my wife, was there's been books written by people that didn't know Jeff. Mm-hmm. Interviewing people, there's no way they could have known what happened during those 4 years because he was on the road all the time. So they didn't know what questions to ask. And I said, I think I want to do one last thing for him as his manager and put a stamp on his legacy so that people 100 years from now, when they're hearing Hallelujah, there's a book that people could say, this is about him.
Why do you think in 2018 that Jeff Buckley is still so important? Because, we mentioned before Kurt Cobain, Nirvana had a catalog and they reached a certain height of popularity. Jeff Buckley had that, but I feel like, because I was in high school during that time, he was still somewhat under the radar.
He was big internationally. He wasn't so big in America. He only sold around 100, and I put it in the book, I want to say it was like 123,000 CDs and some cassettes, something along those lines. Where worldwide he was gold in several countries, and selling out multiple theaters, and the media just loved him. And I think a lot of that has to do with, besides Germany and America, those are regional markets. So if you do something in New York, you're not going to hear about it in Cincinnati, where if you do London, it goes across the country, or Sydney, it goes across the country, and so on. So I think that's why people liked it. And they're more open artistically. You have to remember, when Grace was released in 94, that was the height of the grunge era.
Right.
And we had some backlash from college radio. They didn't know what to do with the Live at Chennai EP. And I kept telling Jeff that you're an original, and it takes a little longer to rise above that noise crowd, But once you do, there's only one Jeff Buckley then. And what was interesting in the book, Leah Reed, his product manager, said, I remember when they signed him to Columbia, she said, we were trying to, there wasn't nobody to compare him to. Most people say, oh, they're the next Beatles or the next Soundgarden or whatever the case may be. And then towards the end of the book, she says, in the last chapter, it's funny now because people say he's like Jeff Buckley.
Right.
Where when we signed him, there was no such thing to compare him to. So it's, and it's interesting. I talked to Andy Wallace, the producer of Grace, yesterday, who's going to produce the next record. And I asked him if he'd read the book, and he said yes, he participated. And he told me a story, and it's in the book too, how he mixed Nevermind by Nirvana.
Okay.
And before Jeff, everybody wanted to work with him because of Nirvana. He says, I don't get Nirvana anymore. I get Jeff Buckley because it's a timeless record. You put it on today, you don't know what decade or even if it was a new record.
You're right.
And that's pretty special accomplishment on just one record.
That's what the point I was getting at. Like, all these years later, and just to have that one record, and still the love and outpour, and people wanting, wondering what could have been. But the only thing that he could have been compared to, which is nothing, but again, would be his dad. So did that really upset him?
Yeah, he didn't know his dad. He met him one time.
Right.
In fact, in the media, they used to bring it up, and when we first went on his solo tour, me and his guitar in a car, people would yell out, sing one of Tim's songs, and he'd get angry at the crowd. Well, they had nothing to attach themselves to seeing Jeff other than that, in all fairness. So I eventually, over a course of about 2 weeks being on the road with him before I left, it was a West Coast tour, I said to him a few things. Number one was, what you have to, if a media asks you about your father, you just tell them that you met him once, 2 months before he died when I was 8, but I have several phone numbers of people you can call and ask. And that just stopped the journalists in their tracks, right? And it was being polite, but at the same time, it shut him up. So, and then the other thing was, on his solo tour, it was kind of all over the place. He was telling jokes, and he was nervous, and because he played New York, he was, they had the limos outside. It was a buzz. People would be wrapped around the building trying to get in at Chennai. I told him that he had to command a stage. I said, when Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers or Keith Richards from the Stones goes on stage, it's like putting on your holster. You're a gunslinger. You have to own the stage. You don't ask them to like you. You tell them you're going to like you. And I said, it's about attitude, and I can't teach you that. You have to learn about it. So fast forward a couple years later, actually more, he's doing 2 sold-out shows at the Olympia. It's like 2,500, 3,000 a show, and he's surfing the audience on the second night, and they're ripping his shirt, and he comes backstage and goes up the circle staircase and comes back down. He says, "Attitude?" I said, "Now you got it." It's very rewarding that a conversation that was a few years before, he actually remembered in building his craft.
Well, because you obviously had an impact on him. Did you find that maybe he was looking for a father figure in you or someone else? Or did you
Jeff
see...
and I had a lot of similarities because we moved around a lot. And he was living with several relatives. He didn't have a father. My father traveled all the time. I moved all over the country. In fact, my senior year, right before my senior year of school, I moved from Omaha to Charlotte, and my childhood got wiped out. Because back then there wasn't the internet, and the only way to communicate was long distance phone calls, which were expensive, or write a letter, which
carrier pigeons.
Yeah, exactly. So we had that in common. We found out about that. The fact that I was in metal bands. I was a heavy metal drummer. I also played with the Charlotte Symphony, but there's a musicality to our conversations. There's a person, Stephen Abbott. They call him Abbo. He's the president of Big Cat Records in the UK, and they released Live at Chennai because Sony passed on Live at Chennai at the beginning. And in the book, it's interesting how people talk about Jeff's and my relationship. Abbo said Dave was like a father to Jeff. George the attorney was a friend. I was probably more the stepbrother. But Jeff knew Dave had his back, and not too many people had his back. And if somebody said something about Dave, he was in their face. And he said, Dave was like a father to Jeff. It was the only constant that he had in his life. So that means a lot when that people say that.
Because it's more than just a client, of course.
Well,
it becomes family.
Personal management is about,
your style, I guess.
Right. I turned down offers to go in those big management companies over the years just because I felt personal management should be personal management.
Sure.
No, I'm not going to do a fourth quarter, put him on the road to get cash flow for our quarter because he needs to go away for the next year. I didn't want those pressures or having to deal with them. So I only managed 3-4 artists at a time, and they were at various stages of their career. And then I had a couple people working with me doing day-to-day, so that way I could oversee the big picture but still be out on the road a lot with them. So I enjoyed it.
Cool. I want to get to some fan questions when they come up or organically, because we got plenty on Facebook and Twitter. You guys submitted them either through alternativenation.net or the Desperate Times 90s Music Podcast Facebook page. This is from Jarek L., and he wants to know, we were just talking about this, so how did you try to market him? Because he didn't fit into any popular genre, but a singular talent. So what was your vision for him, or did he have his own vision first?
No, we actually called it the no promotion plan.
Okay.
I'm serious. When on that ride, and the reason I went on the road for the first 2 weeks, because I'd just come on board prior to that Live at Chennai tour beginning, and I said to him, it sounds like the record company's running the show, and they're a great label, and they have great ideas, and they were doing the right things. But I said, I need to know, you got to trust somebody, and Jeff never trusted anybody in his life. He was let down by everybody, friends, family, whatever. I said, if you can't trust me, I'm not the guy. I need to know your fears, your likes, your dislikes, musical, whatever, so I know how to protect you. And he started talking, and I said, how do you see yourself? And he just shot up Bob Dylan. Bob doesn't fit a genre. And that's why he signed to Columbia. And that and Springsteen, and obviously his A&R guy, Steve Berkowitz. But he said to me, I don't want to edit my songs, which most artists do to put on radio. I don't want to do MTV videos. I don't want my songs in TV shows or film soundtracks.
Okay.
And I said, okay, this is going to make me popular at the label. And I said, well, you either do those or we have to do it one fan at a time. And that's going to be pretty grueling because we would do a U.S. tour, then we'd do 2 weeks off, a European tour, then 2 weeks off, and then Japan, and then Australia, 2 weeks off, back to the U.S. So he was on the road a lot, and that's how we did it, one fan at a time.
I love it. So this is going to be another fan question. This is from Vanessa Melanie. So what then was his primary motivation? what did he want? Just to be Bob Dylan, just to play his music? What made him get up in the morning to want to do what he did?
He just loved music. I mean, like I said in that first meeting in the first chapter, I mean, he was talking everything from heavy metal bands to Pakistani singers and Nina Simone and everything else. He was always yearning to find the next thing. And his next record wouldn't have been like Grace. And that record wouldn't have been like, he told me he wanted to do a Pakistani album one time. He wanted to do scary music, heavy metal another time. So he was going to be all over the place. So it would be Jeff Buckley. If you look at the album cover of Grace, you see this, we call it the Judy Garland jacket he's wearing. He picked that shot because it showed him as an entertainer with the old mic, and that it didn't pigeonhole him musically. He could go anywhere he wanted to. Because, usually you can see an album cover and you go, oh, that's a heavy metal band, or that's a singer-songwriter, or whatever. So, yeah, he just loved music, and he was happiest when he was on a stage in front of people. He used to tell me, then I don't have to deal with my family situation. I don't get it too personal in my artist life because it never goes anywhere good. Because, wives, girlfriends, whatever. So I didn't really get into it too much with him.
I gotcha. Another question is from John Fitzpatrick. What was Jeff's routine before and after performances?
Well, just chill out with the band. He loved hanging around the band and the crew. He treated them both separately, where a lot of bands would treat the crew like in another way. They'd be on a different bus or whatever. They wouldn't talk to him. And he just relaxed, having beers, Jeff liked to mimic people, and nobody was safe. So on the bus rides overnight, there was an old show, Beavis and Butthead on MTV.
Yes, I'm aware.
He would do Beavis and Butthead, or he would do a James Brown album and do the backup singers as well as James Brown, as well as the other raps, as well as the instruments. And he would even, do me, in front of me. Nobody was safe. He'd know you in 5 minutes. He could mimic somebody. When live at Sinead Tour, when I first went out with him, I think it was like the second or third show. You used to go into truck stops back in the 90s, and they'd have all these bad cassettes. Oh, they'd have some good ones like iconic country singers or one-hair metal bands that, they were just trying to get rid of the cassettes.
Okay, yeah.
So he bought a bunch of them, and it was everything from like a one-hit heavy metal wonder to an iconic country singer. And he mimicked all of them on like an 8-hour drive, and he knew about them musically. And he would have discussions with him. And it was like watching a show, seeing this guy sound like, Bob Dylan or, some heavy metal band. It was pretty fascinating stuff.
Another question, I guess this is, what we all think of. This is from Brendan. Any music in the vault to be released someday?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. We recorded every show. And he had over 200 shows.
Okay, wow.
And he did a lot of covers in his sets. Also, what I did, and my wife as his promotion manager hated, anybody who took a photo of him in the pit at a live show, to a radio show, to a TV show, to anything, we got commercial rights for. They had to sign off on it. And so I delivered quite a bit of music after his death. So there's a lot of music out there, not to mention, and they've released some of it, his first session solo. They just released, in fact, it arrived at my house the other day, a Live at Sinead box set in vinyl that came out. So it's I don't know how many albums are in it. That's a word I haven't used in a while.
The albums don't exist anymore.
Right, exactly. Well, these are. There's like 8 of them, 6 or 8 of them in there. So there is lots of music out there.
Well, how does that make you feel that there is more music to be, but he's not around for? I mean, obviously there's a sadness to it, but is there still a joy to be able to share him and new stuff with him instead of just maybe like a remastered version that maybe, there's unheard versions, uncovered versions, and just gathering new fans? Is there any sort of...
I don't listen to his music a lot. I have one CD in my car that was... His last tour was 2 tours of Australia, okay, and some riding in between the tours. And on the first Australian tour, Triple J, live at the Wireless, recorded a multi-track of his show. And it's the best live recording ever, and it's not been released. And Jeff stayed behind after the tour with our sound engineer and mixed it and mastered it and sequenced it and all that stuff. That's the only thing I listen to, and I call it written by Jeff, arranged by Jeff, produced by Jeff, but most of all, approved by Jeff. I'm a little too close to that picture because when it first started happening, I was fired a few months after he died, along with the A&R guy and Andy Wallace. We were archiving things. Part of it was therapeutic. We were hearing his voice and stuff. But I would be sitting there in a marketing meeting, and there'd be all these approved photos of him. And somebody would say, well, I like that one. I said, but he didn't approve that one. Or let's remaster this or remix it, or let's add this other song from this other show. I said, but Jeff already approved that. So being the manager, when the artist says it's approved, that's when you go, this is what we're releasing.
Right.
So that I found very painful. So getting fired was almost a joy. A, I was probably too close to the situation because fans want to hear his music. But B, I didn't have to deal with that anymore.
Burden.
It was terrible.
So that you can properly grieve. But you're saying now with this this brand new book, this is the first time, maybe that you've dealt with the grief. So what do you want people, his fans, to get from your book? Other than, of course, remembering Jeff and not letting his memory die. What do you want the takeaway to be?
Well, myself and the people that are in this book, which I actually asked questions, gave Jim Irvine, my co-writer, the questions, and he did a lot of research on the certain topics. And I wanted a complete book because we've never talked before, none of us. We would call each other so-and-so was doing something, and we'd say no. I wanted to put a stamp on his legacy, so that every day when more and more people are finding out what he's about, it's just through the music, somebody would be able to say, oh, you should read Jeff Buckley From Hallelujah to the Last Goodbye, because it's like the definitive book on Jeff Buckley.
Right.
And that means a lot. You don't make money on books, okay? It's not a financial thing. I don't make money off Jeff Buckley. I did have a contract in perpetuity. I settled that one, and I don't make a dime off his estate. I want that very clear.
Yeah, you wrote that in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is about somebody reading it and having the people that were closest to Jeff Buckley, because Jeff let everybody see a different side of him. So between all of us, there was a complete Jeff Buckley, I believe. I remember Stephen Abbo said about Jeff, he said, I could tell you how many pints of Guinness he could drink before he went to the bathroom. Dave could tell you other things, and so it was interesting when you read the different takes of people. And it's a complete book. So, for example, I wasn't there for the Live at Sinead recordings, his signing, and the majority of Grace being recorded. I was there for the adding of So Real and taking Forget Her Off and the mixing and all that, getting the band together, the tour, all that. So in the book, in the second chapter, and this is Jim Irvine's creativity, he said, I said at the beginning of the second chapter, so I'm going to let some people tell you about Jeff prior to me coming in December of '93. And they all talk about him being signed, the crowds at Sinead, the making of Grace, how the songs came together, all of that. And then at the end of the second chapter, his product manager, Leah Reed, said, well, George Stein, who was, quote, manager, was an attorney. And they said we knew we needed somebody to come in, and somebody that knew the road, a real manager. And that's when Steve Berkowitz said somebody like Dave Lory, and then I take over the story. So you get the whole complete Jeff Buckley. It's not just about my 4 years with him. It's about from day one coming to New York.
I think it's brilliant, and I can't wait to read the entire thing. Just the chapters that I did read, I felt like I was there, on such a lower level. I'm reliving it, but that's nothing compared to the people who actually knew and loved him. So now that we have the definitive, and this is available everywhere now?
Yeah, I mean, you can even go to the website, jeffbuckleythebook.com, and I've got several every week. If you register, I send out videos of me talking about specific subjects. Cool. They're on the website. Also, some press, other radio interviews, hopefully this one. And it also has the tour dates because I'm going to do a tour around the world doing Q&A with the fans.
Awesome.
So I believe it's important. Again, all the local markets are promoting the show, so it just gets more and more people to know about it. But more importantly, I have kind of an agenda for it, the Q&A, but it's not a strict one because I want the Q&As with the fans to be what they want to get out of it. So I want them to ask the questions that they want to know what we're doing right now.
Sure, yeah. No, exactly. That's what it's all about. It's about the fans because that's all I am. I'm just a fan who happens to have a microphone in front of him, but I'm not certainly I'm not using the microphone as Jeff did.
Well, I told my wife, I said, this is my last, because I've had some real decadent tours in my career of, heavy metal bands and, excesses. I said, this is my last decadent tour of rock and roll, and I retire. Okay. But more importantly, I'm going to be in Australia in October, and that's one of his biggest markets. And I know that when I get on that plane and leave Sydney to fly back home at the end, it'll be pretty emotional.
Just brilliant, the book, and I can't thank you enough for your time. Now that the book is out, though, I still have to ask: do you think there's going to be a movie in the future?
I have been approached, and there are some people reading the book right now. Movies take a long time. I don't claim to be an expert at it, but the basis is there. I mean, the two people that are reading it, I can't name, obviously, because they haven't said yes, but they said the Jeff Buckley story hasn't been told, and we're huge fans, so that's a start. Okay? But one of them said, wow, it's got the love story. You meet your wife on the road with Jeff Buckley. You get married. You have 2 kids. There's tragedy. There's musical genius. He said it's got everything you need. And it could be, I think it's more of a period piece because that particular time frame, the old show vinyl didn't really do justice to the music industry. Okay. And they didn't listen to the people that were on their board or their advisors who were in the music industry. But the late 80s and 90s was a time when hip hop and punk and all these musical genres merged, Run DMC doing a song with Aerosmith, and it was quite the scene in New York City at the time with CBGBs and all the clubs, and when musicians could actually afford to live here,
right?
Which is true, and the clubs could stay in business. So
yeah, BB King's just shut down here in the city.
I know, it's so sad, and I was in Las Vegas. I saw CBGBs, and I was like,
"Oh yeah, in the airport?"
It's so, it's terrible. Anyway, but I try to put a little bit of this in the book so people can understand it. And the other thing about the book, I want people to get out of it. It's a peek behind the curtain between the manager and artist relationship and what you go through. You fight. There's good times. You're protecting your artist. There's fights there. But, and hopefully if you're not a Jeff Buckley fan, you can read the book and go, oh my God, this is what takes place. And so I was very honest in the book.
More than just the music, the dynamic, like who he was, the dynamic between you guys. That's what's brought me in wanting to do this interview. So I wish you, on your farewell tour, nothing but success. And I hope this has brought you some personal healing because, time it heals wounds, but they never really go away, especially how close you guys were. And I do hope, if the movie does come out, I know we're getting questions like, is James Franco going to play him because he looks just like James Franco?
Well, I heard Jared Leto wanted to play him. I know the estate was trying to do a movie, and they've had several false starts, but there's enough people out there, and there's some other people that have talked about wanting to play me or others, so we'll see.
Who would play you? Who do you think would play you?
I heard Christian Bale. Because, which would be a compliment because I'm not that good looking. But the thing is, a lot of these actors want to do credible pieces to keep their credibility, after blockbusters. So, but we'll see. I'll leave you with one story, though, while I was writing the book.
Okay.
I just downsized and moved into a 3-bedroom apartment. My daughter's in college now. So in the back porch, my wife and I would have coffee every morning. And there'd be this red cardinal that would show up in the backyard out of the blue and just sit there. And the story goes that a red cardinal is a sign someone who died is visiting you. Mm-hmm. So over the course of a year and a half of writing the book and this happening, we would say, "Hi, Jeff." Mm-hmm. Yesterday morning, I'm drinking coffee outside my apartment. I'm on the ground floor, and this red cardinal comes up, and I'm sitting on this brick thing, and the cardinal lands on the brick. So what I'm saying with that is I'm hoping that I've done right by him in what I've put together. And I think that I have.
I think you have too. I not just from the conversation now, but reading the other day, like I feel it. I absolutely feel it. And everything that you've explained as far as nothing from his estate, all of that. I mean, I could tell that, but it's obvious. So I can't wait for, people who haven't read the book yet, because I know it's brand new, will read it. And just, thank you for your time. And anything else you want to get out? What's the website again? Was
JeffBuckleyTheBook.com. It's real easy.
Cool.
You can pre-order the book even today, but it's out next week. It's going to be in the front of the stores, Barnes & Noble. You get it at Amazon.com, et cetera. So, join the website, and we send out something every week. And then you can see where I'm going to be at, and come on out, and we'll have a good evening together.
Awesome. So again, the book is Jeff Buckley, From Hallelujah to the Last Goodbye. And this is Brando saying goodbye on the Desperate Times 90s Music Podcast. And my sign off, just since it's a 90s music podcast, is from a 90s movie, which they're going to make the third one, Bill and Ted. So be excellent to each other.
Awesome.
Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes!